Yes, it was. I think that was more funny. At first, I said, "Oh my God, he left it in there," and then I listened to it and watched it, and I says, "That's good." This is Sara Levison.
And this is Paul Tiger still.
And we are both sides of center.
What's the still?
You are still with us, Paul.
Okay.
Yes.
So
Once and forever, Paul Tiger.
What are we doing here today?
Well, we're talking about freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we just have a wide open agenda. We're not.
Yes. Yeah. Well, we're. I think. Well, what do you have as our prop today, Paul?
This is a book from Cato, the Cato Institute. It must be trashy, right? So this is the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
And so we are in
the pocket copy.
Well, the pocket copy, but we are also in this period of time between Juneteenth, which is a celebration of freedom, that the last African Americans finally heard that they were free. They were still enslaved in Texas.
In Texas.
Much after everyone else was freed.
But Texas really is another country.
Yes, it is. If you ever lived in Texas, I have a child that was born in Texas, yes, and I've lived there. But 4th of July is coming up, and so we're going to talk about freedom and Supreme Court, maybe what the Supreme Court views as our freedoms and our rights. Let's kick it off. I mean, what's going on with you, Paul? What are you thinking?
I was not unhappy, not displeased with the overturn, of example, for Roe versus Wade. And it sends things back to the states. And it really is about states. Justice Ginsburg stated numerous times in her biography as well that she always thought that this was an issue for the states to decide. So it's a delineation of freedom at the states. The state has more freedom than the federal government. It's really not up to the federal government.
To make those decisions, basically the court said it was not in the Constitution.
It's not in the Constitution.
And so if it's not in the Constitution, any state can deal with it, but then when the states deal with it, then there's a constitutional challenge. So it goes to the Supreme Court.
So then it goes back to
the Mississippi law was a constitutional challenge, and that ended up in the Supreme Court.
And the constitutional challenges end up being more about whether or not the state can manage its own laws, create its own body of law. And so people would say, well, is this a violation of a person, or is this a violation of the state? Did the state do something wrong? And that's really what the cases are that are going to court. They're less about an individual.
Look at the voting rights cases. I mean, in the context of freedom, being able to cast a ballot, I mean, having access to, and of course we've just had a primary election here in Colorado, and I, for the first time, served as an election judge, and that's
the first time.
First time. I had not been an election judge before. I had always wanted to do it, had not done it. But I think that the freedom to be able to cast your vote, not just saying there's one day between certain hours and your freedom is restricted. That's whether or not states then, again, if that's a states' rights thing, voting rights was passed and the Supreme Court could get a challenge to voting rights, and they can say, in fact, that the states are obligated to, it's the state's ability to hold those elections, even if it's a federal election.
The court cases are very seldom about an individual.
Yeah.
They don't elevate to the Supreme Court or even the Court of Appeals in your state unless it's something that really affects a wide group of people or a wide body of law. So you're saying, I'm going to go and get my rights. Well, it better be everybody's rights that you're talking about, or nobody's going to listen to your case.
Well, and so the other decision on rights was the overturn of the New York City law to be able to freely carry even without a permit.
Right.
And I know you're you're a Second Amendment
I've kept on top of this.
Second Amendment person, but when the difficulty, I believe, is that if you have a right to carry a gun and you're not carrying a gun, then are you going to be in danger of your physical, space? And in the case that happened in Arvada, last year, there was a good guy with a gun who was shot and killed by the police.
Right.
Because
Right.
they thought he was the bad guy with a gun. So when you're looking at, in general, what you might see as a curtailing of this individual right to carry arms, when does it become then that so many people are carrying, the police, as it happens in Chicago and other places, they can't tell who they need to be looking at because
I have
everybody
a solution.
has a gun.
The solution is to take the guns away from the police. They use them to kill citizens. More often, they use them to kill people that they didn't need to kill.
Right. Well, that has been happening for a very long time.
Yes. So we just take their guns away and give them electric.
And what happens in Uvalde
telezappers, the
then?
telezappers.
And what happens in Uvalde then when there's an 18-year-old?
Well, so in
Automatic.
London, in England,
Yes.
while bobbies don't have guns and aren't wandering around with guns, they have armament cars driving around the city that have a bunch of guns in them. And when the police need them, they arrive and police have them.
Well, certain special details do have arms.
Let's not get off into my love of the police.
Yes.
Which, by the way, in Longmont I do, and I met with our police chief the other night. I've met with him a couple of times. We have a new police chief.
Yes. It's been in
Zach
place
Artis,
about a year. Yep.
Zach Artis, and he's very calm, and I enjoy him. I'm not going to see him having some sort of a conniption over something that's happened at the police department. But these cases and what people's individual rights are, as opposed to all of our rights. So the question is
So do women? So when Roe is overturned, and there's no, in states that have no exceptions at all for ectopic pregnancies or rape or incest.
They also, a lot of places had trigger laws.
Trigger. We can talk about trigger laws in a moment. But for those places, and I know in Ireland there have been very well-known cases of women who have died, and the infant has, the fetus has died late term because of a serious health condition. And so instead of having one life that's saved, you have two lives that are lost.
And then doctors get into a situation where they don't want to do certain types of treatments because it might be considered an abortion or leading up to an abortion. You're doing this exam because you want to perform an abortion, or you might perform an abortion. And while doctors say, well, there's the Hippocratic Oath that I would not do any harm, that doesn't mean that the state isn't going to come and imprison you because it believes you are intent on doing harm.
Well, and with the advance of technology, there are even many that are saying that other reproductive options like in vitro fertilization. So if you have a selection process, somebody is going to get prosecuted because in consideration of that state's law, you could say, well, hey, that was a viable human being, even if it was in a test tube.
Yes.
And that would not be, and so I think that not having, in some ways, reverting to the states on this issue in particular opens up so many cans of worms, number one. And number two, something that was an in-place law for that had said there was a constitution basis for this freedom of choice.
You've talked about, just a few minutes ago, about how this would be done by initiative.
Yes.
And in Colorado, the moment that there was an idea that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned, the leaked document, I'm not sure that was a leaked document, that might have been a precursor, was that Colorado got in gear and put women's rights high, a much higher scale.
And Arizona is doing the same thing.
But
And
there
other states, yeah.
were places that already had trigger laws in place
Mm-hmm.
and then began to create new ones if they didn't. And a trigger law essentially says that when the Supreme Court overturns or some reason that a law is overturned, they immediately take action. So all of these laws that they had in mind that were anti-female, anti-abortion, took place the moment that Roe versus Wade.
And I know in Mississippi, where the case, the Supreme Court case initiated, there has been an injunction, and some clinics are still providing services to women that were already had appointments and everything until the injunction is lifted.
And I don't want to get too far afield, but on Saturday there was an arson here in town.
Yes, that was deplorable.
And
And arson and graffiti.
can you tell me something about the organization?
No, I know nothing
Okay.
about the organization. And how they already knew that was that organization. When I read about it, I couldn't.
So I also have not been up on the news and should go back and look at that. But
Is it domestic terrorists? So the FBI I think, were contacted. No.
But here it is. It's in our town, and it happened here. And they were providing abortion counseling or health counseling. And the interesting thing is the brief thing that I read in the paper said that they were Christian-based group. So you would think that they're trying to give options to save a baby.
Yes.
Right?
That was
So
what the-
who is it that set this place on fire? Pro-abortion or against abortion? It's really difficult to tell. Of course, arson is such a weird crime anyway.
Why is it a weird crime?
So I was a firefighter for a number of years, and we were asked to observe the crowd of people who had returned to look at the fire to find out if there was a sex criminal there who was, it's often considered to be a sex crime. We'll cover that at some other time.
That's another topic to see. I learned something all the time.
Dispatch. I have one here.
So you have your pocket constitution.
I do. Are we gonna read into it?
Yeah.
No. I actually just wanted to cover some of those things that had happened with the Supremes, and
Not the girl group.
not the girl group. I think actually that this overturning will have obviously, but it says large consequences. But it will take a mirror for a lot of things that get sent to the Supremes. Can we decide that here? Is this a law that we can make a decision
Well, and
about
as
here?
Justice Thomas commented, now everything's on the table.
Yes.
I happened to attend a wedding, a same-sex marriage ceremony this weekend, and in Texas, and they have a trigger law. So if same-sex marriage is overturned constitutionally by the Supreme Court, then essentially this family member of mine will no longer be considered married, number one, but could face criminal prosecution for the lifestyle that they live.
Right.
They live with someone of the same sex. And so they basically will have many rights taken away. And then at that point, where do you say you can't marry somebody of a different color?
It was Texas that had a law that was overturned at the Supreme Court that actually made homosexuality legal. And now they're very prepared to go in the other direction again. I have a solution. Let them secede. Let them become
They
part
already
of
have their
Mexico.
own power grid, and that we know how that worked out one cold winter.
Yes.
Yes. Many people suffered.
I
just think that there's some
Mexico
aspects.
wants them back.
Oh no, Mexico does not want them back. No, Mexico, and it is like a different country in South Texas.
Yes, it is.
It's as culturally different as New York, Philadelphia, regional cultures that are very distinctive.
Are people in different states more free than others?
That's a good question. There's a big variation in state constitutions, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And when I came to Colorado for the marijuana and the fishing.
And marijuana still wasn't legal,
Wasn't
though,
legal,
Paul.
and I was poaching. But
You were poaching fish or marijuana?
both. One of the things I always felt, my brother was going to school here, and I came out here a couple of times, and I felt so much more welcoming and open and social and just everything. And so I moved here. Many people did, and have a lot of the same stories about why they love Colorado. And often I'll be talking to friends on the East Coast of Chicago, where things are going on, and I said, wow, but we wouldn't do that here. And people are saying, warning me, this is going to happen to you, this is going to happen in your state. And I said, no, I don't think that that's ever going to happen here. One of the things that we have here is a very robust initiative process.
Yes, we do.
Okay. And for our
Robust and not exceedingly difficult. So we talked about direct government. Will Roe versus Wade decision, and also the decision in the New York gun case, promulgate freedoms based on direct democracy. And this is not a system of government based on direct democracy. We elect
This is a system of tort law in which we sue for our freedoms.
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so when I ran for county clerk in 2002, there were 33,000 laws on the books of Colorado, and more keep growing.
Right.
And Sean Mitchell, who was a Republican and from Broomfield, his goal was he had 5 bills, and he would take one of them had to be a repeal. And I'm trying to remember where it is.
Like you can't park your horse and tie it up on Independence Day on what side of the street in Denver?
No, some of his repeals were pretty amazing. It had to do with gun laws or whatever it was. But for example, preemption, I'm not sure how far I want to get into this. It's really a topic for another day, maybe a whole...
Yeah, preemption is a whole different rabbit hole to go down.
Right.
Who gets to preempt who?
That's right. And so now the legislature says that, oh, well, cities and towns can preempt firearms ownership. That is going to create another big opening for tort law. There are a lot of lawyers who are going to make a killing on this topic.
That was not a joke. Well, I just think that individual states, we see this when we have what they call blood borders between New Jersey and Pennsylvania. You could buy alcohol at 18 in New Jersey. People would go and buy alcohol. They'd drive it into Pennsylvania, and people would...
People in New York are driving into Canada to buy tobacco.
Because of less taxes, maybe. But I do think that part of the issue with the Constitution is if you're a strict originalist, as many of the justices are, the Constitution was written that in a time where they could not imagine what was here. It was never. It's considered a living document. But if you look at the Declaration of Independence, they recognize the King of England as having a divine right, like he was imbued by God. I was reading the Declaration, and I think our original plan was to have guests, and maybe we still do this, read the original Declaration of Independence. Some of it is pretty startling in the language of the 18th century.
So I would love to use this where Colorado demands its independence from the United States.
Now, wait a minute. First of all, Texas was going to secede. Now we're going to secede? No, I don't think so.
Why not? You know, there's as I was talking about before, there's the folks in the other half of the country. They have...
Which half?
Yeah, exactly.
The half that's not here, or...
Yeah, I always say west of the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi. It's really not the Mississippi, but it could actually be the difference from Nebraska to Colorado. I don't know. There's something that happens I think that maybe it's because I live in Colorado and consider Colorado to be more liberal. I think that Colorado is more liberal than the states.
Well, maybe not liberal, I would say. I would say very independent. People here, if you look at, as migration happened west, people had to depend less on government to arrive to help them than being self-sufficient in some ways.
I wouldn't want my libertarian friends to be insulted when I say liberal, but I do mean it really is much more about individuals.
So if it's all about individuals, why would the Supreme Court limit the right of an individual who happens to be female to bear children?
My wife incidentally says to me, and I think that this is a pretty valid point, that anyone who's not a woman should shut up about this topic. But
well, however, the other part, the arguments that are happening is that you're forcing someone to bring a pregnancy to fruition, yet there's no responsibility of the other half that created that that human entity. Well, I mean, there's been all kinds of things going on saying, well, you know, we should do a DNA test on every child. And when we find out who the father is, that father will be, you know, chased down for child support. I mean, yes, men can have as many children as they want and choose to support them, but, you know, women, you bear the child, and what are you going to just say, I'm going to give it up for adoption, just like the
how
man
does that, how would such a law come into play? How would you think that the legislature would pass such a law? No. No, that would probably be an initiative which would fail.
Well, it could be a parental rights where the child could sue for support. And basically, you'll create a whole nother level of family law for a sue for support. And it wouldn't be the mother suing support.
We've been so successful
with
the
state. Actually, if the state becomes ward of many more children, the state then could assume.
The state has been sued numerous times recently about its inability and non-caring to take care of children.
Right.
So Child and Family Services doesn't do its job.
Well, part of the default argument is a woman can give up this baby for adoption or give it as a ward of the state, and then the state is unprepared, as you've noted, to care for the infant and bring it to, you know, full adulthood.
That's fine. I mean, if there's a place for a child to grow up, it's terrible that it should be institutionalized, but that's better than living in the roadway or being dead.
Dead at what point? At conception? Because some of the...
No, dead as a young person.
Okay.
Living in the roadway.
Okay. Suffering
terribly. To never have been born at all or to suffer terribly. I know that there are religious people that believe that we should bring that child into the world, even if it's terribly disfigured or, you know, or isn't going to have a wonderful life. I wouldn't make these decisions lightly about that, but again, I don't make those decisions.
Right, right. So who makes those decisions? The woman, ultimately the woman, right?
Doctors.
Doctors? Well, they give you choices.
Doctors actually do the deed.
Yeah.
We're implementing, you know, what the law profession is telling the medical profession what it can do. Wouldn't it be wonderful if that was reversed? We could tell the politicians where to go, and the surgeons would give them a place to do it. When we talked a little bit about the difference between, let's say, in Illinois and here, first of all, we have this really robust initiative process. And what I wanted to say about that is that in order for something passed by the people to be overturned in our state house, you need a supermajority of both houses. So that's 2/3 of both houses. That's a lot of work, and it never gets done.
Right.
I always thought that that would happen with...
Well, in our initiative process, it can be 50% plus one vote. In some states, the initiative process has been re-legislated to be restricted, that a winning vote has to be 60%. It can't just be a simple majority.
Right. The initiative in our state has actually turned to 60%. You have to have 60% initiative of the populace. But in overturning that, in some places, all you need is 51% to overturn, 51% of the legislature to overturn what the people have passed. I don't want to live in a place like that. I live here. I look at that when my friends in Illinois and Indiana tell me how their initiative process works, which is more of a referendum. You take it to the legislature, and if the legislature likes it but not so much, they'll let you put it on the ballot. It's a free-for-all here, and so therefore I seriously suspect that people will bring more or less proactive legislation in favor of abortion or to oppose it. And we'll see those as initiatives on our ballot. We have already seen ballot initiatives limiting the rights of women, which have failed so far.
So far, yes. I just think, though, that the patchwork of when you have a law in place, basically a judgment in place for 52 years almost, and it's overturned, then what was settled case law is now thrown
All
back.
questionable.
Everything is questionable then, because now we can create separate but equal. I mean, we're looking at public funds being able to be spent for private religious education, as happened in the case in Maine recently,
Right.
the Supreme Court. And so when, I guess in that case, when there is a void, I'm not going to say a failure of a local school district to have a high school close enough to children, families with children who need high school education, than to say they're going to be able to do a religious institution. That to me is a serious
So more parochial schools will be created, and they will take money from the public educational trough, which I don't really have that much of an issue with.
But especially now that we know that everybody can be online and choose to be online for education, then brings you.
That really is the succo education.
But when you're making an argument about it, there are people that have who are homeschooling their children that still have access to all the public education
Homeschool
opportunities.
is using those things online, but it isn't setting your kids down in front of the computer and expecting it just to pour in.
Right.
Homeschooling is a process, and people are involved in that. But you have those resources, and I like that, but I'm not all that pleased with public education as it's been occurring for the past 20, 25 years. I think it's
But you're pleased with, the separation of church and state line being blurred.
If a school is doing a good job, but it can't get money because our taxation, I would like for parochial schools to get money from the public system. Because people have paid into that. Why should I pay into public school system and then send my child to a private school? Why can't I get? This is an old argument.
And I think it's the religious. I mean, public school is one. Private school is one thing. That's non-denominational, non-religious based. So if somebody wanted to, again, I think it's in this country, you could end up with situations that say. You have a mosque that wants to operate its own school. However, getting government funding, and then the government saying, well, we think that teaching strict Islamic religion is actually a threat to Homeland Security. So at what point do you say that the doors are open?
You can teach
I mean, I'm using that as an example.
You can teach it,
however,
but you have to have students.
Radicalizing people, whether it be radical,
so if we
any kind of radical religion.
If we lived in some Middle Eastern country where kids can be forced to go to school, forced to do this and forced to do that, so we think that we can force people to do things in the United States, and that actually isn't very true. I have a lot of friends who went to Catholic school who did not turn out to be, right-wing, And I didn't expect them to. That actually wasn't what they were being taught. They have very good moral fiber, some of them. Some of them have turned out to be murderers and rapists just like everybody else. I mean, it's not like, oh, something special is going to happen there. Parents would like that. Parents would appreciate that.
I find this attitude very, very strange coming from you, because I thought you were more of the Ron Reagan freedom from religion.
Well,
And this would be really...
we're not forcing people, so
No, you're not,
school
no.
is not religion.
But you're forcing government to support religion when that's a
No,
separation.
I'm not forcing government to...
No, really, because they'd have, in that case, you'd have to turn
It's not the government's
tax
money.
payer money over.
No,
Well,
no, no.
well,
The money doesn't belong to the government.
Actually, doesn't it? Once you pay your taxes, they get to do whatever they want within
No, well,
the rules, right? That's part of your issue with
Well,
taxation.
we'll have to get into the Constitution here.
But we also have to end up talking about that taxation issue, because if I object to my tax money being used in that way, don't I have that right to object?
And you then also should accept the objection of some other person who says, but I don't want my money, the taxpayer dollar, used to pay for Sarah's something. There is an issue about whether or not the government is funding something. Things get much more complex and sticky. But it's not the government's money. We gave it to the government to use it to manage our country. So does the government get to decide, or do we get to decide?
Well, they get to decide,
Okay,
because
because
we
we
elect
paid it to
people
them.
to form a budget, and they don't say, well, I mean, you and I want to do this budgeting stuff, but we've talked about it, to get people more involved to influence the budget.
Right.
And I think that's, again, we have these constructs and lanes that we're in.
I know.
And we
so,
can't, and we can't just say we're going to break through this lane and we're going to go, like, you know, we have those lane assist cars now. So your lane assist car is not going to let you move out of your lane, Paul.
Right. So you're saying, oh, well, it's for those people to decide. We gave them all of the money, and now we're going to let them decide to do with it whatever they want.
Well, it's a
But-
representative democracy.
But on Tuesday nights, there's a bunch of people who come down into the well, into the
City council chamber.
council chamber, and then enunciate, tell them how they would like their money used or not used. The parks fee, let's stop that. Why? What are we
Yeah,
doing?
I know. We're going to have to get a referendum. We're going to have to get a referendum or an initiative on the ballot to kill the fee.
To kill the parks.
Especially because there's this whiff of a quality of life fee going on, tax going
Right,
on.
there's now going to be a quality of life tax. Okay.
Yeah. Is it
So,
going to improve my quality of life? I'm not sure.
It's going to.
It might make me more miserable.
Probably the person who proposed it. But sooner or later, the person who proposed it will find out that it did not improve their quality of life. People do things mostly because they, as an individual, want to see something happen for them. It's hard to think for a group. Although we do have, obviously, groups that come.
So let's bring it back full circle.
Yeah.
Many of us believe that the Supreme Court is supposed to be above all this fray, and that they're supposed to be looking out through their interpretation of our founding documents, what is the greater good for the country.
But that's not their job. Their job is,
It has been their job, though.
yes, and that's what
Desegregation, voting rights that were supported.
they're responding to laws that were passed. They're responding to things that happen in the country. But they're always coming back to compare it to this document to see whether or not the government has the right to do something. Really, it's not about whether or not you have the right. You have all the rights. Can the government stop you?
Well, curtail my rights. So.
That's right.
Anyway, so we talked a little bit about freedom today. We talked about rights. We'd love to hear from you. Paul, you want to give them our email address?
We're both sides of center at gmail.com. You can find us on YouTube.
Yes.
With Curmudgeon in Training TV.
Network, yes.
And let's see, I have started a Twitter feed, which I don't know.
You don't know.
We need help. someone needs to teach me about social media. My idea of
We're
social
dinosaurs,
media
Paul.
is go out for a beer and shoot pool.
I'm Sara Levison,
I'm Paul Tiger.
and we're still both sides of center.
Well, it really wandered, didn't it? But that's okay. I liked it.